Welcome to the very first lesson in this epic series where we're studying the story of God. I'm excited about this series. I'm glad you're a part of it. It's going to be an amazing time as we learn more about the person of God. Now, if you'll take a look at this coffee cup, I'd like you to imagine with me trying to fit the entire Gulf of Mexico into this coffee cup. That's a little bit of how I feel as we begin this study on the person of God. Someone as inadequate as a human being trying to use something as small as words to describe someone as great and big as God. It seems a little impossible. You know, if we were to let our own intelligence and our own imagination, if we were just left to that, to try to describe God, what we would say about Him would be less than a coffee cup full. And it would just be one person's guess over another person's guess, and none of us would really ever have anything truly worthwhile to say. But you know, if we stop and we look at the Bible, God's book, God's words that He gave to us, in that book He tells us about Himself. He tells us about His character, tells us about His values and about His love, and all in ways that we can understand and that our human minds can grasp. What the Bible is God's invitation for us to get to know Him. Now, our goal is not just to learn a lot of facts about God, even though that is vitally important. The goal of this study is to try to get to know God in a more powerful and more personal way. And I can say with all the confidence that there is that no subject is more important to talk about than God. As a matter of fact, life's major pursuit is not knowing about yourself, but knowing about God. Life is not about discovering more about you, it's about discovering more about God. So as we launch into this study, this epic study, in lesson number 1, there's 2 attitudes that I'd like to ask you to go into this lesson with. One is the attitude of expectancy. The other is an attitude of humility. The attitude of expectancy says that I expect that God will do something great in my life as I learn more about who He is and how He shows Himself to all of us. The famous preacher A.W. Tozer said this: "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." God is so great and our belief in Him is so important that even the smallest change in our perspective on who He is and how He acts has the power to transform our lives. So our beliefs about God set the course of our life. So I'm asking you to go into this study with an attitude of expectancy. But I'd also like to ask you to go into this with an attitude of humility. We have to have humble hearts as we study the person of God. Augustine, one of the early church leaders, said this: "If you can understand it, it's not God." That means for you and I to understand God on our own would be a little bit like an ant trying to understand us. Only by God's grace and only by God's revelation of Himself do we even know anything about Him and what He's like. And so instead of us approaching this study with a desire to figure God out, let's begin with a humble idea, a humble intention that we would let God show us who He is and what we need to know about Him. Some of you may have heard about the little girl that came into her mom and said, "Mom, I'm going to draw a picture of God." Her mom said, "Oh, honey, nobody knows what God looks like." The little girl looked at her mom and with all the confidence of a little 5-year-old, she said, "Well, after I'm done with my picture, they will." You know, think about that. What does God look like? As a matter of fact, right now, close your eyes for a minute and just picture God. Do you see an ancient man with long hair and a robe and maybe a white beard or long flowing hair? Is that the picture of someone who that you see? Is it a picture of someone who doesn't understand modern things like physics or computers or smartphones? Sort of a grandfatherly person who's just there when you need him? Do you see a picture of light or a king on a throne? Or do you see thunder? Do you hear thunder and see lightning? You see, in order to see a better picture of God, it's good to start with thinking about how you picture Him. So why don't you stop this video right now and in your group talk about how you picture God.